Are classic motorcycles worth buying? Today, I'm on my Honda NT650. This bike right here isn't truly a vintage classic bike, but it is an aging motorcycle, and it's over 30 years old at this point in time. This is a 1988 model, and I own quite a few motorcycles from the 50s, 60s, and 70s, to be more specific, and to talk about some real vintage bikes. When machines get old and they get to be vintage status, they have a lot of things that can go wrong with them. There are a lot of problems that can occur: carburetors jamming up, the disc brakes locking up, people parking them for years on end, and just little things that come up on a day-to-day because you're riding a machine that can possibly be 50 or 60 years old. And today, I want to talk about what it's like to actually own, ride, and enjoy those machines. Are owning vintage bikes like this Hawk, CB750s, BSA Golden Flashes from the 50s actually worth owning? Because a lot of people always say in my comments, oh, well, you're going to continuously be working on them, you're going to continuously have problems with the bikes, or something along that extent. And to be honest with you, all of that is true. Yeah, you're going to be working on your machine. You're probably going to have a few problems here and there. A big thing about vintage machines is they're really simple to work on. When you look at some modern day machines, especially when you look at modern day cars, obviously it's not a motorcycle, and motorcycles are obviously less complicated, but with modern day machines, you got to get the tuning right, fuel injection right, and sometimes you can't work on it yourself. While an old machine, you can get your hands dirty, get some of the simple things done, and it also allows you to do your own inspections and maintain your machine properly. You know it's been done to your machine. Now, if you're not someone who's mechanically inclined and you're perhaps thinking, well, I don't want to be working on my own machine, perhaps an old British bike isn't for you, but the 70s Hondas are some of the best examples of vintage machines that you can get on and just ride. My CB750 needs very minimal service, and especially if you've had someone go through the bike, it's not always super expensive. If you have a nice running bike that needs a final tuning, if you get the tuning done by someone else for about $1,000, maybe $700-800 for a nice carb clean and sync up, a couple $100 to repair some miscellaneous parts, you most likely will have a bike that, if you keep on top of it, is going to be an excellent riding machine. This bike right here is from '88. It's over 30 years old. And this is beginning to enter vintage territory. I like to call these bikes modern day classics. And this bike rides and feels more like a 2000s bike because of how ahead of its time it was and how ahead of its time Honda was. But when we're talking about old machines, this bike has shown its age. This bike needs new front fork seals. It has pitting on the front forks. The engine paint is starting to peel off. There's things that, because of its age, it is starting to show wear. Perhaps bikes in disrepair are not for someone who doesn't want to get their hands dirty, but a bike like this that's been upkept is a fantastic option. Vintage bikes do break. It's part of the territory of owning them. But I think that vintage bikes get kind of a little bit of hate for being these broken machines, when in reality that's not really the case. You know, a lot of the bikes I buy them not running. The reason I bought a lot of my vintage bikes not running is because there's a lot of machines out there that aren't running, and because they're not running, I get a good deal on them. I'm not someone who's afraid of getting my hands dirty and working on the bikes, even though right now I probably have one too many projects and I need to start chopping them down and going through them. But there's plenty of nice vintage bikes out there that are running, riding, and ready for the season that you can buy. Yes, you're still going to have to do some work to them, but no, you do not need to constantly get your hands dirty every single time you want to ride. Having some type of mechanical knowledge will go a long way. But even if you don't, as long as you're willing to get your hands dirty on a machine, a vintage bike isn't something that's meant just for mechanics or just for people who know what they're doing. Now that some of these Hondas are starting to get into vintage territory, or some of the Kawasaki's or Suzuki's are now vintage bikes, they are phenomenal machines that almost anyone can look at an owner's manual, look at videos, read forum posts, and learn how to fix simple, small issues, do their own maintenance, save money, have fun working on your machines, and have a fantastic bike to ride. In my opinion, a best first motorcycle is a vintage bike. A lot of people recommend you get your hands on like a Ninja 400 or a Ninja 250 or something along that extent. What I always think and what I would recommend to new riders is an old bike. A bike that runs nicely, maybe needs some small repairs, because you can learn how your machine operates if you have no idea how things actually work, because then you can recognize when problems occur. Even on newer bikes, you can recognize what the problem is, save yourself hundreds of dollars of repair bills for small issues. But also, I think as someone who does ride, you need to understand how the machine works, how it brakes, how it accelerates, why it's breaking up. And when you get an old machine, you do learn that very quickly. I like the emphasis that even the old British machines are phenomenal motorcycles. They are absolutely fantastic. Now, a lot of the seals and gaskets and stuff, they had cork gaskets in the tank petcocks, and some of the seals perhaps aren't sealed up properly, and the bikes will leak a little bit of oil, especially when you let vintage British bikes sit. They are dry sumped. Basically what that means is the oil sits outside of the motor, but over time that dry sump gravity feeds down, and it gravity feeds into the sump where it's not supposed to be. So you have a ton of oil where it's not supposed to be because of the gravity, and when you kick it over, it's going to spit some of that oil out. But properly maintained, cared for British bikes, yeah, they'll sweat a little bit of oil, but they're still going to be reliable, fantastic machines. I obviously would not recommend you to rely on a 60-year-old motorcycle, but you definitely could use it as transportation. But with the age of the bike, drum brakes, things like that, they're not really optimal for certain condition riding. But they're definitely fantastic machines that you can ride, enjoy, and use as transportation, perhaps as a secondary transportation method. I think most vintage bikes should be a secondary option. Even though you could rely on a properly maintained CB750, I still would recommend, I don't know, it's just me, but I guess to each their own. The British bikes kind of got a weird name. I have a British bike parked in one of my shops, and I have people come in, they're like, oh, that's awesome, I'd love to own one, but they constantly have issues and problems. Well, that's not really true, because the British bikes, and even some of the German, like the BMW that I have, those bikes, you put fuel into them after years, decades even, in fact, of them sitting. As long as the motor's not seized up, if you kicked it a few times throughout those decades, the bike always wants to fire up. It's honestly impressive how robust those vintage British bikes are. I think they just get a bad name for themselves because, yeah, they're old. Like, I have a 1952 BSA Golden Flash. 1952 is what, 60 or 70 years ago? Yeah, of course the bike's gonna have to have a rebuild at some point. Of course it's gonna leak a little bit of oil, but that's kind of the character of the machine at that point. I do get a fair amount of comments from younger and older riders and experienced motorcyclists saying that you're never gonna find a vintage bike in great running condition, or that they're always gonna be broken. But the truth is, that's not always the case. You're definitely going to pay extra for a bike that's been 100% restored, or a bike that's been super well looked after, and you can get probably 30% off of sale price, if not more than that, for a bike that's running, riding, but needs a few things. And I think that's just an excuse that you get to learn and actually get hands-on and form a bond with the machine that you're riding. vintage bikes are 100% something that everyone can enjoy and appreciate. If you're thinking about getting one, I say do it, because they're so simple. They have carburetors, and you can usually chase down any issues that they have pretty easily with limited mechanical knowledge. That's all I have for this video. I thought it was an interesting topic to talk about. Let me know, as always, what you think in the comments, and I will see you guys, as always, in the next video.